Now it's 10:15.
Ladies and gentlemen, once again we welcome back to the microphone Tommy Handley. Yes, it's that man again.
It's that man again, yes, that man again. Yes, the Tommy Handley is here.
He isn't here yet, but expected at any moment. The whole population of foaming at the mouth is gathered at the station to welcome him.
Pride and joy, Mr. Handley's boy. Oh, it's useless to complain. When trouble's brewing, it's his doing. That man again.
We present the ITMA File, the story of the most successful comedy show in the history of broadcasting, based on material in the BBC's written and sound archives, compiled and narrated by Gordon Snell.
The first wartime ITMA was broadcast on September the 19th, 1939, only a fortnight after war was declared. Almost at once, the program became a national institution, its characters as familiar as the people next door, its catchphrases a part of everyday speech. The producer, Francis Worsley, said our job was to provide entertainment to make people laugh. And in this, he and his writer Ted Kavanagh and everyone else associated with the program succeeded to a degree which no other program before or since has equalled.
Our job was to provide entertainment to make people laugh when there was, on the face of it, little to laugh at. Reality was horrible. Reality was nightly air raids. Reality was standing alone, a little uncertainly perhaps, in the face of an inexorable and frighteningly efficient foe. So we escaped from this reality into a world of our own. This world which highbrows called surrealistic and others merely crazy.
Throughout the 6 years of war, ITMA helped to maintain morale. For more than 3 years after the war, during a period of continuing hardship, rationing, fuel shortages, ITMA held its place in popular affection. Only the death, suddenly, of that man himself, Tommy Handley, brought the program to an end after 310 editions. Before the war, there had been a brief series of It's That Man Again. The title was a catchphrase of the time, which newspaper headline writers reached for whenever Hitler was in the news. Ted Kavanagh, who wrote the scripts for this and all the ITMA programs, described in his biography of Tommy Handley how it had all started.
In pre-war days, the show with a story was a radio novelty. Bandwagon pioneered the idea with the Wednesday night activities of Arthur Askey and Stinker Murdoch in their BBC flat. The order went out to start another series to be broadcast same time, same station, every week. And Tommy was an obvious choice to play the lead.
The setting for the first program in the series, broadcast on Wednesday, July the 12th, and the 3 which followed, was a cruise ship with Tommy Handley in charge of festivities. He had a secretary called Celia, nicknamed Silly, and an aide called Vladivostok, who described himself as an eccentrical engineer. After a break, the series was due back on the air on September the 19th.
It was obvious that the cruise idea would have to go. Holidays at sea were as passé as peace. Suddenly, there was the strange outbreak of initials. Everyone remembers this sort of thing. ARP, RAF, RNVR, WVS, and so on. And there did seem humorous possibilities in this epidemic of abbreviations. There was also the phenomenon of gigantic ministries, which, though planned secretly months before, seemed to the newspaper reader and listener to bloom overnight. We thought that the ministry craze should get some topical publicity too. On scraps of paper, the new Tommy Handley emerged as Minister of Aggravation and Mysteries, provided with accommodation by courtesy of the Office of Twerps. We knew we should certainly cash in on the initial vogue. MAM was no good. OOT was hardly worth consideration. Nothing could be done with TH. One day, while we were racking our brains for something easy to say and easy to remember, Tommy was doodling on the blotting paper, as he usually did at our conferences. He wrote out the name of the show with large artistic capitals. It's That Man Again. The title was, of course, staring right at him. When he said ITMA, we knew our search was over.
As well as a new title and a new setting, the program had a new format, with Tommy Handley as the fast-talking central character in a series of encounters with a succession of characters who entered through the famous ITMA door. There was the boozy Colonel Chinstrap with his I don't mind if I do, Mrs. Mop, the charlady, with her Can I do you now, sir, and the endlessly polite Claude and Cecil with their "After you, Claude," no, "After you, Cecil." A BBC audience research report enthused.
Among fans, the reality of the characters is completely accepted for this mad half hour, and their catchphrases remain to illumine ordinary everyday situations and to enrich ordinary everyday language.
Can I do your nails, sir?
Audiences like that naval one at Scapa Flow showed just how popular the characters and their catchphrases had become.
Well, if it isn't Mrs. Mop, the mascot of the Marines.
I've brought this for you, sir.
Oh, isn't that nice? What is it?
It's a bosun's blancmange, sir.
Bosun's blancmange? Looks more like a dumpling with a duffel coat on.
DTFN.
An LYSLDDTH.
What's that, sir?
Never let your sea legs dangle down the hatch.
There is a very warm affection manifest for all the characters, and a keen anticipation of the weekly adventure in this strange world, built in the dimensions of Disney's cartoons, the Marx Brothers, the pantomime, and Alice in Wonderland, rather than those of the real world.
But some of the characters did have their counterparts in the real world, as Tommy Handley said.
Our characters are really taken, as you know, from more or less from life.
Oh, they are taken from life, aren't they?
Oh, yes, yes. One in particular was the hesitating man who used to say, gone round the what's the name for the, and how did you do so-and-so?
Oh, yes.
Well, I happen to know, at least, I used to frequent a certain hostelry where the mine host used to talk exactly like that. If every other sentence was, what's it? For instance, if I asked him how he was, he'd say, oh, I've just got a touch of the what's it, but I've been round to what's it, the chemist, and she's given me, a what's it, and so the what's it went on all day. We never found out what he had.
Well, I'm missing on one cylinder.
Yeah,
Miscellaneous?
no, wrong.
Oh, you're quite right. Now, aren't you the man from the Min of Hagen Fish?
Oh, no. No, I come from the
Add a couple?
No, from
Admiralty.
No, Admiralty.
Oh, yes. You mean those things on the water.
No. No, different man. You're thinking of my what's his name?
Oh, not your thingamajig.
No. Oh, no. Well, here's to
Absentees?
Yeah, no. No, I just bid.
Well, I'll double it. That's right. I remember him well. He used to be a porthole polisher in the Skylark.
Most of the ITMA characters were the creations of Ted Kavanagh, whose work helped to establish the importance of the writer in radio. Before then, the radio comedy writer had been thought of, if at all, as someone who simply churned out gags to order. Many people in the audience, in fact, believed that the comics made up the gags and jokes themselves as they went along. Ted Kavanagh was recognized as an equal partner with Tommy Handley, and their partnership was compared by one writer with that of Gilbert and Sullivan. With the show's producer, Francis Worsley, they had intensive sessions each week, picking at and adding to and rewriting Ted Kavanagh's original script, always with the one aim in mind, to make audiences laugh.
The actual dialogue of ITMA occupied an average of 18.5 minutes out of the half-hour show, and in this time we tried for at least 100 potential laughs. If we reduced it to 90, because we couldn't cudgel our brains for the other 10, several million people would say that ITMA wasn't as good as last week, and they would have been right. On the other hand, if we got a laugh every 8 seconds, as we sometimes did, then the show was regarded as a smasher.
ITMA was far more, though, than 100 gags strung together. It conjured up a place, whether it was the cruise ship of the early days or the Office of Twerps, that first wartime setting. The Office of Twerps was headed by the Minister of Aggravation and Mysteries, Tommy Handley, and he began the first show with the words, "Heil, folks, it's Mein Kampf again." And the program went on to mock the many restrictions and regulations that were beginning to appear. "I'll sign everything that prohibits anything, that's what I'm here for." Then there were the jokes about spies, and the first appearance of the telephoning spy, who became as famous as any later mole or double agent.
Hello?
This is Tom speaking.
You sound as though you've got a touch of the Timoshenkos.
I will see that your stage company does not arrive tonight.
Oh, yes, they will. I'm sitting on one of the baskets now.
There will be no train.
What, not even Jack Train?
There will be no show either. Once has spoken.
When war broke out, the BBC's variety department was moved to Bristol, where the regional headquarters was soon bursting at the seams. And with only one studio and an output of up to 9 variety programmes every day, space was quite hard to find.
We found ourselves housed all over Clifton, and the studio problem was tackled by wiring up every parish hall in sight. My office turned out to be a dormitory in one of the Clifton College houses, and as I looked out over the famous close, immortalised by Newbolt as being bathed in a breathless hush, there were on all sides the sounds of pianos hammering out popular tunes, or composers' efforts as they wrestled with building programmes, while on the close itself the silver shape of a barrage balloon with its attendant crew took the place of the cricket 11.
Because anyone who worked there had to be given clearance by the Ministry of Information, the variety department had to manage at first with only a repertory company of 22 performers and 1 orchestra for their entire output. Then clearance was given to a second company, which included Gracie Fields and the cast of that other popular radio comedy Bandwagon, featuring Arthur Askey and Richard Murdoch. Tommy Handley was already an established radio comedian, and soon the new show that was to make him a national figure went on the air.
On the 19th of September 1939, at 9:30 p.m., with a script stamped in impressive red letters, passed for broadcast, ITMA had its real first night. After a 2-hour rehearsal, a long one for those early days of war, we took the floor in the Clifton Parish Hall before a small audience mainly composed of people on the staff. Outside there was the blackout, responsible for many a black eye, for somehow one was continually walking briskly into lampposts or parked cars. Wardens were being very strict about even the tiniest glimmer of light, and we had to creep into the various studios round a complicated system of screens and curtains, carrying our gas masks wherever we went. But once inside the building, all was gaiety and light, and a sort of party spirit pervaded the atmosphere. For one thing, there was no stage, so that the audience and the artists were all together on the same level. And when they were not actually speaking their lines or performing, the cast sat down, often on grand piano or floor, thus giving the whole thing a very informal air.
But the variety department does seem to have been a special source of worry to the BBC hierarchy. They wondered if those show business folk really had enough sense of responsibility.
It is on the whole more likely, I think, that problems will arise in the sphere of the variety department. Unsuitable gags, songs about the British Expeditionary Force enjoying itself in estaminet and so on. And I hope that details of that kind will be carefully watched.
There were a lot of shows to keep an eye on. Besides ITMA and Bandwagon, the department's output included shows with titles like White Coons, Gentlemen, You May Smoke, and a program called Adolf in Blunderland. But comedy was doing its bit for the war effort. BBC programme directives to staff conveyed the Ministry of Information's thoughts and wishes on the boosting of home morale.
Air raid wardens to be taken seriously and not as figures of fun.
French men and women to be shown in a sympathetic light.
The directives said there should be an aggressive attitude created towards the invader, a drive against gossip and rumour, and a soft peddling of sport, except as a necessary recreation to help efficiency at work. But the BBC wanted to resist too overt propaganda.
The principle, however, should be maintained of not admitting propaganda to such programs unless it takes its place on merit as entertainment.
Conscious propaganda in entertainment is generally ineffective because it is conscious. The criterion must still be entertainment value.
All scripts had to be ready 48 hours in advance, so that they could be scrutinized by security and policy censors. ITMA had its occasional difficulties. Once a reference to frosty weather was cut out. But it is sometimes hard now to understand the reason for the censors' cuts. Was it security or a sensitivity to innuendo?
Please delete the wind which we all suffer from very badly down here.
Change name and nationality of Olga Tumblova.
But Tommy Handley's jokes in ITMA and some of the other variety programmes he appeared in were a little blue for some BBC officials, and the grumbling memos made their way to and fro within the corporation.
Edgar was up here on Friday. He was particularly struck by Tommy Handley and gave an instance of a gag about what somebody could do with his bayonet, which sounded pretty raw, if I may borrow one of your adjectives. I've heard similar criticisms from quite a varied bunch of people, and I should like you to keep an eye open for this kind of thing.
There are still complaints of vulgarity in the variety programs, particularly by Tommy Handley. One or two of the harrowing stories I have had retold to me have not, I regret to say, appeared to my mind to be vulgar. On the other hand, there have been some which were definitely over the edge. I know you are watching this very carefully, but if Tommy Handley goes on offending, we shall have to rest him for a bit or do something drastic like that.
North Regional Director to Controller Programs. I find that Tommy Handley is becoming an increasing irritant to large numbers of people up here, and that he is actually incurring ill will for us now. I don't know if anything is likely to be done about this, but I'm just passing on the news for your own information.
Thanks very much for your letter about Tommy Handley. I agree with you heartily, but all my personal researches, such as asking my gardener, lead me to suppose that he is in fact still very popular.
ITMA has already built up into a highly successful continuity show without, as yet, quite achieving the completely universal appeal of Bandwagon. At the present rate of going, the show seems to be capable of continuing for a good bit. If anything, it is improving. The last two shows have been, I think, extremely good.
The radio public, gardeners and all, obviously agreed with Francis Worsley. But curiously, its very popularity resulted in ITMA going off the air when that first extended series ended in February 1940. Sure that they had a receptive public, the cast went on tour with a stage version, and it was more than a year before ITMA was again on the air. By then, the variety department had moved from the heavily bombed city of Bristol to the comparative quiet of Bangor in North Wales. And Ted Kavanagh had decided that the grim events of the war must mean a change of setting, too, for the imaginary world of ITMA.
We realized right away that cracks, however kindly, at government departments would no longer be appropriate. The country was now fighting for its life and still expecting invasion. People had all the war news they wanted, and even the mock activities of the ITMA ministry might seem a little wearying to a people who rushed to the radio every time there was a news bulletin.
To save fuel and pressures on transport services, the government had begun a campaign to persuade people to take holidays at home. They realized that the intensity with which people were working required some kind of break.
The annual fortnight by the sea was off for the duration, but holidays were not. We decided to bring a holiday atmosphere to listeners. We thought it would be a good idea to give them a nostalgic glimpse of that rather unsatisfactory, ill-run little resort which never seemed very good, but somehow always got chosen for the holiday the next year round. We called it Foaming at the Mouth.
Pray silence for his pawn shop, the mayor, the unredeemable Thomas Handley.
What did he mean, unredeemable? I may go in every Monday, but I come out on Friday. To point the gag, I will now sing For You Alone. I'm having a real outing tonight, a state visit to the first performance of my new repertory company. I'll just dispose of my municipal business, the fluffer in my waistcoat pocket, and go to the station for the official welcome. Now, let me see, what's on the agenda?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice day.
No.
Any rents, rates, or taxes?
Not today.
Oh, I'll call again.
Don't.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Nice day.
That was Maximum, the supercharger. But now, what's on the agenda? Down with the cat sitting on it. Get off it. It's not a catalogue. You've gone and purred all the print off the pages. That's the worst of having everything tabulated.
One of the ITMA performers who joined the cast at Bangor was Fred Yule, now 86.
My first character there was Norman the Doorman. I had to announce, I suppose, because I had the biggest voice and certainly the biggest body. I used to have to say, "Make way for the Right Honourable Tommy Handley, Esquire." All words to that effect, and whatever other thing that used to be written in. And from that, of course, I used to play little other characters coming in, such as, say, if anywhere in a script where it says man, it was probably me. One that was there was, "Oh, lovely grub. Oh, boy, I know. Oh, God, I can't help it. You know, I had about a steak there, weighed about 1.5 pounds, pound and a half steak, and that was all done with mushrooms. Oh, lovely grub. Well, of course, they had to take that out because apparently there people said it wasn't fair considering they were on strict rationing and one thing and another. Later, I became Atlas. That was where Tommy used to say, pick up so-and-so. I said, well, me and my state of health? Not flimming likely, you see. And of course, a great fat fellow like me saying, no, talking like that, of course, it went very well. We all mucked in. In fact, the biggest feed, the feed I'm speaking in a general sense, Tommy was the chap that fed us more than anything else. It was a sort of general happy family where we all mucked in, and honestly, we never knew what was coming next.
The arrival of this cavalcade of variety brought a degree of terror into the hearts of some of the citizens of Bangor. What, said one of these? A high street filled with painted women and acrobats?
But there was no doubt about the impact of ITMA on the general listening public.
In the opinion of many of the listeners, ITMA was the best variety show ever. It continues to be far and away the most popular variety show on the air.
As such, it was an excellent platform for mentions of the various campaigns, like Digging for Victory, or the one run by the Ministry of Food, extolling the virtues of carrots. A mention was enough in ITMA to reinforce the campaign. All it needed for a laugh and a reminder was the exchange, do you know what you can do with a carrot? And the answer, yes. The BBC's programme directives fussed away at possible outlets for the various campaigns in radio programmes.
Home front, salvage. The campaign is more or less a running one. Anything that can reasonably be done in the way of gags or mentions in variety programmes, magazine programmes and so on is welcome.
Home front, destruction of rats. A campaign is to start in the first week of September. This will be primarily a talks and news campaign, but it may not do any harm if in a melodrama the hero occasionally calls the villain a rat.
There were warnings, too.
Home front, disturbing noises. May I please remind you to keep out of the programmes all noises that listeners in their present state of anxiety might consider disturbing or confusing, particularly all noises that resemble sirens, bombs, or whistles.
The director of Variety was anxious that his producers should obey the censorship rules.
Censorship in wartime for variety programs falls under two headings. A, dirt. B, defence.
He said the producer always had the responsibility for getting the dirt out of his programs, but there was a colourful way that the censor could help.
I will ask security censor to query in blue pencil anything that he considers to be dirty, as an indication in case you yourself have missed it. This querying can be taken notice of or disregarded at the producer's discretion. The security's censorship cuts will continue to be marked in red and must, in every instance, be enforced.
There were other rules, too.
I am afraid we must ban She Had to Go and Lose It at the Astor.
And ITMA was not immune from criticism.
Will you please watch the ITMA scripts a little more closely with regard to dirt? Certain lines in these scripts have been passed for Handley when they would have been cut for anybody else. But on one or two occasions recently, you have been overstepping the bounds. The stick-it-up gag last week was a case in point, which should not have been passed for ITMA or anything else. Will you please watch this matter closely?
Thank you for your note about ITMA. I am most alarmed at your implied suggestion that it is becoming a dirty show. This, naturally, is the very last thing I want to happen, as ITMA is essentially a family affair, and I take every precaution to keep it so. My task is made no easier when the comedian is permitted considerable liberties on his overseas programme.
That programme was Tommy Handley's Half Hour, broadcast in the BBC's overseas services. It was the cause of a number of complaints from people like the director of the BBC's North American service.
Tommy Handley is a very good comic, and I know he likes his bit of dirt. But last night I was very horrified by the string of oldest dirty jokes in the world, even the elephant picking the bun up with his tail. We really cannot go on putting out this kind of thing.
Considering the number of comic foreigners who popped up in ITMA, mangling the language like Senor Soso, or peddling dirty postcards like Ali Oop, it's surprising to find that there were directives like this being handed down.
Impersonation of Chinese. Please ensure that all impersonations of Chinese characters are played straight and that Pidgin English or any other type of foreign accent is not used.
In June 1941, after the German invasion of Russia, the director of Variety sent an urgent plea to the controller of programs.
Can I have a directive about Russia? Not in political terms, but whether reference to comrade and topical gags about Russia generally are permitted. They have already started popping up. Would be grateful to know before, at any rate, Howdy Folks and Tommy Handley shows this week.
The reply came back promptly.
Please stop jokes about Russia for the time being.
No wonder the director of Variety, in his memos to the controller, occasionally felt down in the dumps.
There is the stultifying influence of the mass of restrictions and censorship, as well as the inevitable wondering in the minds of producers as to whether being screamingly funny is of national importance in times of total war. We try to convince them, and ourselves, that it is of great value to morale. That undoubtedly is true, but at the same time it is difficult for the individual to give his whole mind to the construction of a gag sequence in terms of broad comedy immediately after the fall of Tobruk.
But the controller of programs had no doubt that as far as ITMA was concerned, the director of Variety was doing a fine job.
I really must congratulate you and Worsley and Kavanagh and everyone on ITMA. Last night's show, for instance, was really first-rate, and the series has maintained a very high standard throughout.
And at the same time, early in 1942, a high-level program committee gave ITMA its accolade, though it didn't mince words about some of the other programs.
Program comments. Very good. The Man Born to be King. They Also Serve, Royal Observer Corps. Alexander Nevsky, Sir Max Beerbohm, and ITMA. Good. The Singing Sailor. George Formby. Some material wrongly passed. Quentin Reynolds' postscript. Awful. Maud. Awful. Considered as Tennyson.
And at the same period, the BBC's Audience Research Department was reporting,
For the listener, and there were very few critics, ITMA has all the virtues of the perfect variety show.
it was a view that was shared by some people in very high places.
Windsor Castle, 2nd of March 1942, private and confidential. Tommy Handley, Esquire, care of the BBC, Bangor, Carnarvonshire, North Wales. Dear Sir, the King and Queen have expressed a desire to see a performance of your company.
Tommy Handley thought at first that the whole thing was a joke, like the practical jokes he enjoyed playing himself. But far from it. The royal performance would mark the 16th birthday of one of the programme's most eager listeners, Princess Elizabeth. Before long, a voluminous correspondence had built up, and Francis Worsley was visiting the master of the royal household and reporting to his superiors in the BBC.
Scripts. I asked him about censorship, and his most emphatic reply was that the King and Queen did not want artists to prepare special bowdlerized scripts for a command performance. They wanted good, broad humour, as broad as George Formby, but not filthy. Rehearsals. It is perfectly all right for us to rehearse there during the morning, although we shall have to do this in competition with the Guards Band, which will be playing in the park. Running order. The first part of the programme is just a plain variety bill with no particular reference to broadcasting. The second part is a deliberately built-up presentation of a studio show, with red and green lights flickering, preliminary speech to audience, etc. The only refinement being perhaps comic hats and Fumph speaking off stage.
The plain variety bill included such artists as Jack Warner, Rob Wilton and Vera Lynn, and the fact that ITMA was the star attraction that followed them shows how popular it was in royal circles. Tommy Handley and Ted Kavanagh were able to make a preliminary prowl around at Windsor and find material for jokes about the Sergeant Major and the Guards Regiment that would make up a large part of the audience. The show was a resounding success. The cast, when they met the royal family afterwards, were amazed at their detailed knowledge of the programme, and delighted later when they each received an album of records of the performance, signed by the King and Queen and their two daughters. It was said that the royal copy of the recording got quite worn from being played so much. And shortly after the Windsor performance, when the current radio series ended for the summer, the controller of programmes wrote,
Dear Mr. Handley, I cannot let your temporary demise pass without my official tribute and a tear. I feel I must write and thank you for your faithfulness to broadcasting and the tremendous amount of work you have put into this programme. And the same goes for the able team of artists. Like millions of other people, I am looking forward to the revival of ITMA in the early autumn.
Tommy Handley was receiving fan letters at the rate of 700 a week, reading them all personally and answering as many as he could individually. The letters revealed just how much the programme and its catchphrases had become part of the nation's everyday life.
There was, for example, the letter from the head of a demolition squad. His men had been called to a house which had received a direct hit. He clambered over the pile of rubble, which had once been a little home in Bath. "Anyone there?" he called, as he flashed his torch here and there. "Yes," piped a small boy, lying buried under the debris. "Can you do me now, sir?" Doctors and nurses wrote of the victims of bombs, who, knowing that death was coming, murmured TTFN as the last coherent thing they said.
The armed forces, too, revelled in the ITMA phrases. Pilots on bombing raids could be heard saying over the intercom to each other, "After you, Claude," "After you, Cecil," and "Don't forget the diver." The ITMA team did performances for the Army and the RAF, as well as the Navy one at Scupper Flow. As the war situation improved, the variety department moved back to London. The news began to provide scope for cheerful allusions and jokes about Hitler and Mussolini and Allied victories. But there were still directives going out about subject matter, both serious and less so.
Will you please see that no gags or jokes are made in connection with flying bombs, as this is far too delicate a subject to be treated in a flippant manner. Solicitor Gags, will you please see that no detrimental references are made to the legal profession in scripts? Such cracks as, "I must consult my solicitor," when he comes out of Dartmoor, must be deleted by the censor.
But the country survived the flying bombs and the lack of solicitor jokes, and in 1945, ITMA celebrated the end of the war in Europe with its victory edition.
Oh, brought this for you, sir.
Oh, isn't that nice? What is it, a rubble risol?
It's me V-Day offering, sir. I call it peace pudding.
I suppose when you stick your fork in it, it sounds the last all clear.
Oh, sir. Well, TTFN.
Hip, hip, hooray!
What's that, sir?
3 cheers for Winnie. Now, tell the band to strike up.
Which song, boss?
Our victory song, dedicated to the man who's won the war.
You, boss?
Well, that's very loyal of you, Sam. But I smoke a pipe. Now start the procession. We're glad we walk behind the man who smoked the big cigar. We follow the man whose master plan has carried us through the war. One sniff of the old Havana, we'd follow him right to Fujiyama. We're glad we walk behind the man who smoked the big cigar.
The BBC policymakers launched the corporation into the post-war era.
There must be change for the sake of change, so as to give the public the feeling that the old dreary routine of war, as reflected in BBC programmes, has disappeared.
But there was no question of putting ITMA out to grass.
ITMA is an extraordinary social phenomenon, as well as a brilliant programme, and I propose to arrange its continuance for 39 weeks each year until it shows signs of decline.
It did, however, change its imaginary location.
Tommy sets up his standard on a tropical island and soon produces a state of society very akin to a mad version of post-war England.
The island was Tomtopia, and Tommy Handley the governor. Such characters as Chief Bigger Banger made their appearance, and later on, Derek Guyler's Liverpudlian Frisbee Dyke. Another ITMA character was a Welshman.
Now, where's that miner I engaged to help me?
Good morning, here I am. Whatever made me come?
Well. Hello, Sam. I'm delighted to see you. Come in. I've gone away for the weekend.
So you need an expert miner. I know the very man for you. It is my old woman.
Your old woman? What does she do besides fill the sink and wash your vat? Have you been underground before?
Oh, I was underground for 5 years, standing up all the time on my stomach.
Oh, of course. You had the bunk below me at Bond Street Tube Station. Many's the fag end I've dropped in your mouth when you've been snoring.
I am looking forward very much to working in the mine. Nothing will ever get me down.
You ever tried hitting Joe Louis? Now, off you go, get down the mine, and don't forget to blow your candle out when you get to the bottom.
The way the Welsh race is belittled on the stage, the films, and last but not least by the BBC, especially the ITMA programme, must certainly give the outside world the impression that the poor Welshman is a real simple Simon. Wales is a land of noble tradition. Her sons have shed their blood freely in the cause of world freedom, and she is entitled to and deserving of fairer treatment from our English brethren.
There were some other complaints, too. The Girl Guides Association was worried about the introduction of a new character, Misguided, and the boozy Colonel Chinstrap, loved by almost everyone, was criticised by some.
I like it, Ma. But for the Colonel, week after week, month after month, and year after year, to glorify drink excesses as a badge of good fellowship and manliness seems contrary to all other cultural activities of our BBC.
ITMA was now rarely criticised for vulgarity, though the senior controller did feel it necessary to remind the entertainment section of a policy change about types of jokes that were permitted.
We abandoned the unequal struggle to decide whether a given joke would pass or not, and took what seems to me to be the much sounder line that we don't do jokes on certain subjects. I am aware that ITMA from time to time gets away with what are literally fast ones, owing to the popularity of the programme, but even these should be stopped.
The certain subjects not to be joked about covered a wide field.
The script should be free from any mention of the following.
Biblical references, for example, Noah, Adam and Eve, fig leaf gags, Cain and Abel, permissible as rhyming slang, not permissible as brother killing brother.
Marital infidelity.
Effeminacy in men or impersonations.
Immorality of any kind.
Physical infirmities.
Unnecessary emphasis on drunkenness, particularly linking with such important matters as road safety. For example, one for the road is inadmissible.
Anything derogatory to coloured people.
No reference to black market except derogatory.
There were to be no gags about certain categories of people. The BBC governors and the Director General headed that list, followed by cabinet ministers and members of Parliament. And solicitors, of course, were also spared. There were to be no suggestive references to
honeymoon couples,
chambermaids,
ladies' underwear and its implications. For example, winter drawers on.
Lodger gags, coupled with commercial travellers.
Farmyard gags, a copulation of rabbits, etc.
Basket.
At the end of 1948, the programme celebrated its 300th edition, with guest appearances from some of the old characters. There were to be only 10 more editions. ITMA ended with the sudden death of Tommy Handley on the 9th of January 1949, the day of the repeat broadcast of that week's show.
I've never known anything like it. The day he died, it was almost as though the king had died or something. All of us in ITMA were absolutely stunned by it. And I remember coming into Broadcasting House the night it happened. I was doing a Sunday serial at the time, and we had broken at 6 o'clock until we went on the air. And I came back into Broadcasting House. My wife had phoned me in the meantime and told me that she'd heard the news on the radio, and I just couldn't believe it at all. And I went into the cloakroom, actually, just to wash my hands in there, and I was standing in there, and Stuart Hibbard came into the room, and he didn't say anything. I knew him quite well, and he didn't say anything. And we were both sort of standing there almost, too full to speak. And then he just turned to me and he said, "I'm just going in now to read the 6 o'clock news I suppose you've heard about." And then just absolutely dissolved into tears. I've never known anything like it. It's extraordinary. And I think it was because of this wonderful warmth that Tommy had.
Derek Guyler.
Tommy Handley, the man who made millions laugh, brought tears and sadness as he made his last appearance today, ITMA Day, and his funeral day. He was driven slowly through London's streets to the crematorium at Golders Green, where he kept a last appointment this afternoon with thousands of the ordinary people of Britain who have chuckled with radio's best-loved star. It was a simple funeral that his relatives had planned for the man of ITMA, but the people of London gave him a prince's funeral.
Well, of course, the flowers stretched, I suppose, for the best part of 100 yards. Never saw so many flowers. And it was the most ghoulish thing I ever remember in my life. They were tearing the wreaths and things to pieces for souvenirs, the public. I can't understand it.
The public found it hard to understand why the BBC, in its first announcement of Tommy Handley's death in the 6 o'clock news headlines, should have referred to Mr. Thomas Handley. It was only that once. Later in the bulletin and in all subsequent ones, it was Mr. Tommy Handley. But once was enough for the press.
The BBC have made an appalling blunder. I'm absolutely staggered at the inept, uninspired manner in which it marked an event that shocked the whole country. The sudden death of the beloved Tommy Handley. In the news bulletins, Tommy was frigidly referred to as Mr. Thomas Handley, a ridiculous formality, and the announcement, which was to plunge the nation into mourning, was put over as if it had no more significance than a soccer result.
Tommy Handley was a comic genius such as rarely comes our way. He chose the medium of radio, and he was miraculous in it. With his passing, a great light has gone out, and our little world, shared weekly by millions of ordinary people, has collapsed as completely as the Third Reich, which indirectly brought it into being.
They were wonderful times, really, because even as I say to this day, I have never had any other show referred to like ITMA. To this day, now, Tommy's been gone 31 years, come the 9th of January. In this town where I am now, there isn't a tradesman or any people I meet in the shops that don't mention something about ITMA and Tommy Handley. So he must have been godlike in his influence, really, Tommy.
Can I do you now, sir?
Dear old Mrs. Muff, well, you do look well. You know, my dado's never been the same since you dusted it last.
I've brought this for you, sir.
Oh, isn't that nice? Well, what is it?
It's a special birthday cake, made out of me head.
All right, I'll put a bonnet on before I eat it. Well, goodbye, lovey.
TTFN.
NCTWWASBE.
What's that, sir?
Never clean the window with a soft-boiled egg. Well, it is nice to see the old pals again.
Dear old man, jolly old man, bringing together the loves of some weather. Dear old man, jolly old man.
Well, thank you, everybody, for your superabundant spontaneity.
What's superabundant spontaneity?
Oh, this is too much. This time you've had it. Frizz, take that.
Give me the friendship of dear old
You've been listening to the ITMA File, written and narrated by Gordon Snell, with Fred Yule and Douglas Blackwell, Martin Friend, Garard Green, Roger Hammond, Godfrey Kenton, Peggy, Paige, and Eva Stuart. And in ITMA recordings, Derek Guyler, Horace Percival, Dorothy Summers, Jack Train, and Tommy Handley. The program was produced by Alan Haydock.
And you may like to know that you can read about that programme in The Listener.